Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel, where we dive into the most spine-chilling and intriguing stories you've ever heard. If you're a fan of scary stories, horror tales, or true paranormal encounters, you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's terrifying experience, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on the creepy content we have in store. Your support really motivates us to keep bringing you more of these bone-chilling stories. Have you ever found yourself questioning the line between reality and the supernatural? What if I told you that some stories are too real, too disturbing to be dismissed as mere figments of the imagination? Today we're going to explore one such story, a terrifying experience that will make you think twice about ever venturing into the woods alone. This unnerving encounter began a few months ago. For some background, I live in a relatively large city, but the neighborhood I call home is quite small and close-knit. Here, everyone knows everyone else, and the local corner store, though small and somewhat shabby, is a fixture in our daily lives. It's run by a middle-aged couple who have owned it for as long as anyone can remember. For years, the store operated from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. daily. That was until about 6 months ago, when it suddenly started staying open 24 hours a day. As a digital artist, I work from home, which means I often lose track of time and sometimes go days without interacting with others. I usually work at night because the quiet helps me focus. It was during one of those late night work sessions that I realized I was out of soda. It was around 2 a.m. and I figured the corner store was closed, so I prepared for a 15-minute walk to a 24/7 convenience store further away. But as I passed the local store, I noticed the lights were still on, and the sign on the door read open. Curious, I decided to check it out. Since our neighborhood is small, I expected to see a familiar face behind the counter, perhaps one of the owner's sons. But to my surprise, I was greeted by a stranger, a tall, hulking man slouched over the counter. His name tag read Jeremy, but he was unlike anyone I'd seen before. Jeremy was massive, with a frame so large he had to bend awkwardly to rest his elbows on the counter. His greasy black hair hung limply over his face, completely obscuring his eyes. Initially, I thought nothing of it. It made sense that they would hire someone of his size to work the night shift. But as I approached the counter, something felt off. Jeremy didn't acknowledge me when I entered. I grabbed a bottle of soda and placed it on the counter next to his long, lanky arms, which were strikingly pale. I pulled out a $10 bill and placed it in front of him. Finally, he gave a slow, strange nod that felt more like a mechanical gesture than a human response. The silence in the store was suffocating. The only sounds were Jeremy's heavy breathing and the low hum of a ceiling fan overhead. As the seconds ticked by, my discomfort grew. I broke the silence, asking for my change. Jeremy responded with a grunt, a deep, guttural sound that seemed unnatural. When he finally moved his hand to the cash register, his arm snapped into place as if he were a puppet on strings, not a living person. I watched in shock as his large hand fumbled with the register, his movements jerky and unnatural. Sweat began to form on my forehead as my heart pounded in my chest. My instincts screamed that something was very wrong. Finally, Jeremy handed me my change, placing it haphazardly on the counter. I quickly grabbed the money and the soda, muttering a hasty thanks. Have a good one before practically sprinting out of the store. As I made my way back home, the cold night air did nothing to calm my racing thoughts. What had I just encountered? Who or what was Jeremy? The dread that had taken root in my chest only grew as I replayed the strange encounter in my mind. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me, cursing myself for ever stepping outside. I put the soda on my desk and collapsed into my chair, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking as I replayed the events over and over, trying to make sense of them. What kind of person moves like that? What kind of person behaves in such an eerie, detached manner? I glanced out my window at the store across the street. The lights were still on, and I could see occasional customers coming and going. But the image of Jeremy, slouched over the counter, his body barely moving except for the slow, labored rise and fall of his chest, was burned into my mind. There was no way I could get back to work after that. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, unable to focus on anything. The next day, I woke up around noon. The memory of the previous night still fresh in my mind. The feeling of dread hadn't left me. It clung to me like a dark cloud, following me throughout the day. I tried to distract myself with work, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of Jeremy's unnatural movements. That night, I decided to confront my fears. I stayed up late again, working on my projects, but this time I kept glancing out the window at the store across the street. I needed to know if Jeremy was really as strange as I remembered, or if my mind had been playing tricks on me. At around 7:45 a.m., I saw him again. Jeremy awkwardly walked out of the store and locked the front door. My heart raced as I watched him repeat the same violent, jerky motions I had seen the night before. After locking the door, he stumbled down the street, his body moving erratically, as if he were being controlled by an invisible force. It was like watching a marionette move a puppet whose strings were being pulled by an unseen hand. My mind raced as I watched him disappear from sight. This wasn't normal. I wasn't imagining something was seriously wrong with Jeremy. But what could it be? I slumped back into my chair, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The puzzle pieces were slowly falling into place, but the picture they formed was one I didn't want to see. Jeremy wasn't just some awkward, antisocial guy. There was something far more sinister at play here, something that defied explanation. 2 days later, I decided to take action. I was done being a passive observer. I needed to know what was going on with this guy, and I wasn't going to rest until I found out. So I got dressed, went downstairs, and positioned myself in some bushes across the street from the store. I was going to watch Jeremy through the front doors, and I wasn't going to leave until I had answers. At this point, I want to remind everyone that if you're enjoying this story, be sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your interaction helps us create more content like this, and we truly appreciate your support. Now, let's get back to the story. The nervousness I felt sitting in those bushes soon turned into pure unease as I watched Jeremy go about his night shift. Just like before, he stood there, slouched over the counter, barely moving. He didn't watch TV, he didn't play on his phone, he just stood there, staring at nothing. As strange and unsettling as it was, I couldn't see anything overtly inhuman about his behavior, at least, not at first. He interacted with a few customers, even got up to sweep the floors a couple of times, but his movements were the same as before, broken, jerky, and unnatural. It didn't make any sense. If Jeremy was some kind of monster, what did he have to gain by working a menial job? Why keep up the facade when no one was looking? Eventually, at 7:45 a.m., Jeremy locked up the store and left, just as he had done 2 nights ago. I didn't follow him this time. Instead, I went back home, my mind racing with 1,000 questions and no answers. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Jeremy was just a socially awkward guy with a strange way of moving. Maybe I was the one being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I had seen something that night, something that couldn't be explained away by lack of sleep or an overactive imagination. There was something wrong with Jeremy, and I was determined to find out what it was. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I went to the store during the day, hoping to talk to the owners and learn more about Jeremy. As I approached the store, I saw one of the owners, the husband, sitting outside, smoking a cigarette. His wife was inside, working the register. "Hey, long time no see," he greeted me with a smile as I approached. "Yeah, I've been busy with some projects, so I've only been up at night lately," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Oh, you didn't know? We're open at night now too," he said, taking another puff of his cigarette. "If you need anything, you can come by." "Anytime." "Really? Are you working the counter at night too?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No, we hired this one kid. His name's Jeremy. You probably don't know him. He's from another part of town," he explained, waving his cigarette in the air as he talked. "Jeremy, huh? What's he like?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. The owner seemed surprised by the question but relaxed again and took another puff of his cigarette. "He's a nice kid. Polite, friendly, good sense of humor, though it's a bit dark. I think you'd like him," he said with a chuckle. That didn't match the Jeremy I had met. The Jeremy I encountered was nothing like that. A dark sense of humor? Friendly? None of that fit. Something was definitely wrong here. "Yeah, I'm sure I'll get to know him better," I said, forcing a smile as I leaned against the wall. We made some small talk after that, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, piecing together the disturbing puzzle I had uncovered. There was no doubt about it, this Jeremy wasn't who he seemed to be. Or rather, he wasn't what he seemed to be. As I walked back home, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. The more I learned, the more I realized that there was nothing wrong with Jeremy, because this wasn't Jeremy at all. Something was pretending to be him, and the thought alone made my skin crawl. But I had to know. I couldn't stop now. I had to see this through, no matter how terrifying the truth might be. Over the next 2 days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting closer to something I wasn't meant to uncover. The unease I felt watching Jeremy, the strange, jerky movements, the unsettling conversation with the store owner, it all pointed to something far beyond the ordinary. It was as if I had stumbled upon a hidden world that I was never supposed to see. That night, I made up my mind. I was going to find out where Jeremy went after his shift. This was the only way I could get answers, the only way to satisfy the gnawing curiosity and fear that had taken root in my mind. At around 7:30 p.m., I got dressed and prepared to follow Jeremy when he left the store. I waited by the window, watching the dimly lit street below as the minutes ticked by. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and determination driving me forward. What if Jeremy saw me? What if he confronted me? The possibilities raced through my mind, but I knew I couldn't back down now. At 7:45 a.m., just like clockwork, I saw Jeremy walk out of the store and lock the front door. My pulse quickened as I watched him begin his strange, erratic walk down the street. His body jerked and twisted unnaturally as he moved, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This wasn't a person, it couldn't be. I waited until he was a safe distance away before slipping out of my apartment and following him. The early morning streets were eerily quiet, with only the occasional sound of a car passing by or a distant dog barking. I kept my distance, careful not to make any noise that might alert Jeremy to my presence. As I followed him, I noticed that Jeremy's path was anything but normal. He didn't take the main roads or well-lit streets. Instead, he weaved through alleyways, cut across empty lots, and made sharp, sudden turns as if he were following a route only he knew. After what felt like an eternity, Jeremy suddenly turned into a dark alley. I stopped at the entrance, peering around the corner to see what he was doing. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him press his back against the wall. Then, in a movement so swift and unnatural it defied logic, his arms bent backward at the elbows and grabbed onto the brick wall behind him. With an inhuman agility, Jeremy began to climb the wall, his limbs moving like those of a spider as he ascended to the roof. I felt my stomach churn with fear and disbelief. This couldn't be real. No human could move like that. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what I was witnessing. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined, beyond the realm of possibility. And yet, it was happening right before my eyes. I watched in horror as Jeremy reached the top of the building and disappeared from view. I didn't know what to do. Should I follow him? Should I run? The fear that had gripped me for days now reached a fever pitch, and I felt the urge to flee, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, my body frozen in place by the sheer terror of what I had just seen. I stayed there, standing in the shadows of the alleyway, trying to process the impossible. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I forced myself to turn and walk away. My steps were slow and unsteady, my mind still reeling from the shock. As I made my way back home, the reality of what I had witnessed began to sink in. There was no going back now. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was in way over my head. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. I told myself that it was just a trick of the light, that my mind was playing tricks on me because I was tired and stressed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen something that night, something that defied explanation. And no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something dark and dangerous. My work began to suffer as a result. I couldn't concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes before my mind would drift back to Jeremy, to the way his body moved as he climbed that wall. The memory haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind like a broken record. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I certainly couldn't focus on my projects. After several sleepless nights, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't go on living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if Jeremy or whatever he was watching me. I had to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. I began by doing some research online, searching for anything that might explain what I had seen. I scoured forums, read through countless articles, and even visited some paranormal websites in the hopes of finding a clue. But everything I found only deepened the mystery. Most of what I came across were wild conspiracy theories, stories about skin-stealing creatures, government cover-ups, and shadowy organizations that supposedly hunted these monsters. But none of it was concrete. None of it provided the answers I was looking for. Frustrated, I decided to take a different approach. I went back to the store during the day, hoping to find out more about Jeremy from the owners. I knew it was a long shot, but I was desperate for any information that might shed light on the situation. When I arrived, I found the husband outside again, smoking a cigarette as usual. He greeted me with a smile and invited me to sit down. "So what brings you here today?" he asked, taking a drag from his cigarette. "I just wanted to ask you a few questions about Jeremy," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. The owner raised an eyebrow. Jeremy? What about him? Well, I've seen him a few times at night, and I was just wondering where he's from. He seems different, I said, choosing my words carefully. The owner nodded, exhaling a cloud of smoke. Yeah, Jeremy's a bit of an oddball, but he's a good kid. Like I said before, he's from another part of town. We don't know him that well, but he's polite, hardworking, and gets the job done. What part of town is he from? I pressed, trying to dig deeper. The owner shrugged. Not sure, to be honest. He just showed up one day looking for work, and we needed someone for the night shift, so we hired him. Did he give you any references? I asked. The owner shook his head. No, but he seemed like a decent guy, so we didn't push it. We're a small operation, you know. We don't have the resources to do background checks on everyone. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. It was clear I wasn't going to get much more information from the owner. Jeremy was a mysterious stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and somehow ended up working at the local store. As I left the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle that would make everything click into place. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure out what it was. That night, I stayed up late again, keeping an eye on the store from my apartment window. I watched as Jeremy went about his shift, his movements just as strange and unnatural as before. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, something that sent a chill down my spine. Every now and then, Jeremy would stop what he was doing and look directly at my window. It was as if he knew I was watching him, as if he could see me through the darkness. And every time our eyes met, a feeling of cold dread washed over me. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that I was being paranoid. But the more I watched, the more convinced I became that Jeremy knew I was there. He knew I was watching him, and he didn't like it. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Whatever Jeremy was, he was aware of me. He knew I was onto him, and that meant I was in danger. The thought sent a wave of panic through me, and I quickly closed the curtains, shutting out the view of the store. But even with the curtains closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jeremy was watching me, that he was out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. Every shadow, every creak in the floorboards, every distant sound made my heart race with fear. I couldn't leave my apartment without feeling like I was being watched, and the constant sense of dread began to take its toll on my mental health. I stopped going out during the day, choosing instead to work from home and avoid any unnecessary contact with the outside world. But even in the safety of my apartment, I couldn't escape the feeling that Jeremy was watching me. I started to hear strange noises at night, footsteps in the hallway, a faint tapping on my window, the sound of something scratching at the walls. One night, as I lay in bed, trying desperately to fall asleep, I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of something or someone whispering outside my window. The voice was low and guttural, barely audible, but I could make out the words, "I see you." My heart stopped. I bolted upright in bed, my eyes wide with terror. The whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. "I see you." I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing with fear. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Should I confront whoever was outside? The possibilities flashed through my mind, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I grabbed my phone and called my girlfriend, Sarah. I hadn't spoken to her much since this whole thing started. but I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of what was happening. "Hello," she answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something's happening, and I don't know what to do." "Are you okay? You sound really freaked out," she said, her tone shifting to concern. I don't know. I think someone's watching me. I keep hearing things, whispers, footsteps. I can't sleep. I'm losing my mind, Sarah," I confessed, my voice trembling. "Calm down, okay? I'm sure it's nothing. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you," she said, trying to reassure me. "No, it's real. I can feel it. There's something out there, and it's watching me," I insisted, my fear growing with every passing second. "Do you want me to come over?" she offered, her voice soft and soothing. "Yes, please. I can't stay here alone," I said, relief washing over me at the thought of not being alone. "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just try to stay calm, all right?" she said before hanging up. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking as I waited for Sarah to arrive. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling of being watched remained, a constant presence that I couldn't shake. When Sarah finally arrived, I practically threw myself into her arms, overwhelmed with relief. She held me tightly, stroking my hair and whispering soothing words into my ear. "It's okay, I'm here now." "You're safe," she murmured, her voice like a balm to my frayed nerves. We sat down on the couch, and I began to tell her everything about Jeremy, the strange encounters, the feeling of being watched. She listened patiently, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "I think you're just exhausted," she said gently when I finished. "You've been working too hard, and it's messing with your mind. You need to take a break, get some rest." "But what about the whispers?" "The footsteps?" I asked, still shaken. "Maybe it's just the building settling, or the wind. Old buildings make weird noises. You know that," she said, trying to rationalize my fears. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that all of this was just in my head, that I was imagining things because I was tired and stressed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Something was wrong, and no amount of rationalization could change that. Sarah stayed with me that night, and for the first time in days, I was able to sleep. But even in the safety of her arms, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The whispers, the footsteps, the sense of being watched, they were all too real to ignore. And as I drifted off to sleep, one thought kept repeating in my mind, what if I'm not imagining this? What if Jeremy or whatever he is knows that I'm onto him? The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and fear. Even with Sarah's presence, the sense of dread that had taken root in my mind wouldn't let go. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at the slightest noise and avoiding the windows at all costs. My work suffered, my relationships became strained, and my grip on reality began to loosen. Sarah did her best to support me, but I could tell that my behavior was starting to worry her. She encouraged me to see a doctor, to talk to someone about what I was going through, but I refused. How could I explain what was happening to me without sounding insane? The truth was, I didn't even fully understand it myself. One night, after another restless day of avoiding the outside world, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in on me, and I needed to get out, to breathe, to escape the suffocating fear that was consuming me. I left the apartment around midnight, choosing to walk through the quieter, less populated streets. The city at night was eerily silent, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an unsettling stillness. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and every sound seemed amplified in the quiet. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted nervously to every shadow, every dark alleyway, but I saw nothing. Still, the sensation of unseen eyes following my every move persisted, a constant weight on my chest. I kept walking, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind, but the further I went, the stronger the feeling grew. It was as if something was stalking me, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickened my pace, trying to put as much distance between myself and whatever was lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, I heard a noise of faint rustling, like something moving in the shadows behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to listen. The noise stopped, and for a moment, all was silent again. But then I heard it again, louder this time, closer. My blood ran cold as I realized that whatever it was following me. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, only the empty street and the silent buildings. My heart raced as I debated what to do. Should I run? Should I confront whatever was out there? My instincts screamed at me to flee, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. Fear had me in its grip, paralyzing me, trapping me in place. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing at the end of the street. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched it, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, it just stood there, watching me, waiting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found the strength to move. I turned and bolted down the street, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty night. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare slow down. All I could think about was getting as far away from that figure as possible. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until I was sure I had lost it. Only then did I slow down, gasping for breath as I looked around to make sure I was alone. The street was empty, and there was no sign of the shadowy figure. But the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I hurried back to my apartment, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the couch. My body was trembling, my mind racing with what I had just seen. Was it Jeremy? Was it something else? I didn't know, and that terrified me even more. The following morning, I woke up to find Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, reaching out to touch my arm. I nodded, though I knew I wasn't. The events of the previous night were still fresh in my mind, the fear still gripping me like a vice. But I didn't want to worry her any more than I already had. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just had a rough night." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she offered to make breakfast, a gesture of normalcy that I desperately needed. As she left the room, I sat up and ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the lingering dread. But even as I went through the motions of a normal day, eating breakfast, checking emails, pretending to work, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. The events of the past few weeks had left me paranoid, constantly on edge, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I snapped. That evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, I found myself drawn to the window again. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what was out there, but something compelled me. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside, my heart pounding in my chest. And there he was, Jeremy, standing across the street, staring up at my window. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him. He was standing perfectly still, his greasy black hair hanging limply over his face, his body slouched in that unnatural way. It was as if he had been waiting for me, as if he knew I would look. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us moving. The fear I had been trying to suppress all day came rushing back, overwhelming me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to break the spell, but I was frozen in place. Then, slowly, Jeremy raised his hand and waved. It was a slow, deliberate motion, almost mocking. My stomach twisted in knots as I watched him, unable to tear my eyes away. Finally, I forced myself to move, yanking the curtain closed and stumbling back from the window. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I couldn't stay here, I had to get out, had to find somewhere safe. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sarah's number, my fingers trembling as I waited for her to pick up. When she finally answered, I could barely get the words out. "Sarah, I need to get out of here." "Now," I said, my voice shaking. "Why?" "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "He's here. Jeremy. He's outside my window," I whispered, my eyes darting nervously to the closed curtain. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Sarah's breathing quicken. "Okay, I'm coming over. Just stay inside. Don't go anywhere. I'll be there as soon as I can," she said, her voice calm but urgent. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Please hurry," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. After hanging up, I paced the apartment, my mind racing with fear and anxiety. Every creak, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump, my nerves on edge. I couldn't stay still, couldn't sit down. The fear was too intense, too overwhelming. Finally, after what felt like hours, there was a knock at the door. I practically ran to answer it, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door and saw Sarah standing there, I nearly collapsed with relief. She pulled me into a tight hug, holding me close as I trembled in her arms. "It's okay, I'm here now," she whispered, her voice soothing. We sat down on the couch, and I told her everything about Jeremy, the shadowy figure, the feeling of being watched. She listened patiently, her expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "You need to get out of this apartment," she said firmly when I finished. "This place is driving you crazy." "I know," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But where can I go?" "You can stay with me for a while," she offered. "At least until you figure out what's going on." I hesitated, not wanting to impose, but the thought of staying in the apartment alone was unbearable. "Okay," I agreed, nodding slowly. We packed a few of my things, and I left the apartment with Sarah, not daring to look back. As we drove to her place, I tried to push the fear out of my mind, to convince myself that I was safe now. But deep down, I knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't over. For the first few days at Sarah's apartment, things seemed to return to normal. I was able to sleep again, eat without feeling nauseous, and even work on a few projects. But the memory of Jeremy's wave, the feeling of being watched, still lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself constantly looking out the windows, checking the locks on the doors, and jumping at every little noise. The fear that had taken root in me wouldn't let go, no matter how hard I tried to shake it off. Sarah noticed, of course. She was patient, supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes every time she looked at me. She encouraged me to talk about it, to try and make sense of what was happening, but I didn't know how. How could I explain something that didn't make sense to me? One night, as we were watching TV, something on the screen caught my attention. It was a live broadcast of a baseball game, and for a moment I let myself relax, enjoying the distraction. But then, in the first few rows of the crowd, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, slouched in his seat with his hair hanging over his face, was Jeremy. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. How was this possible? Jeremy was supposed to be at the store. How could he be here, at this game? The camera panned away, and I blinked, thinking maybe I had imagined it. But when the camera returned to the same section of the crowd, he was still there, unmoving, just staring ahead. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I watched him. It couldn't be a coincidence. Jeremy was following me. He knew where I was, even now. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Was he stalking me? How long had he been watching me? "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, noticing the look on my face. I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't tell her what I was seeing, couldn't explain the fear that was consuming me. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice trembling. But I wasn't fine. I was anything but fine. The fear that had been gnawing at me for weeks now exploded into full-blown panic. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out, had to find somewhere safe. Without saying a word, I got up and walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there, couldn't sit still while Jeremy or whatever he was continued to watch me. I wandered the streets aimlessly, my mind racing with thoughts of Jeremy, the baseball game, and the possibility that I was losing my mind. The city felt foreign and hostile, every shadow hiding something sinister, every face a potential threat. At some point, I found myself in a small, dingy bar. It was nearly empty, just a few patrons nursing their drinks in the dim light. I sat down at the bar and ordered a drink, hoping the alcohol would calm my nerves. As I sipped my drink, I noticed a man sitting a few seats down, watching me. He was in his 40s with short brown hair and a rough, unshaven face. He wore sunglasses, even though the bar was dark, and there was something about him that set me on edge. When our eyes met, he gave me a nod, a gesture that seemed more like an acknowledgement than a greeting. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that this man was no stranger. He was here for a reason. He got up and walked over to me, taking the seat next to mine. "You're in deep, kid," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "deeper than you realize." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Call me Mr. Grayson," he replied, taking a sip of his drink. "I've been watching you." My heart skipped a beat. "Why? What do you want?" I demanded, the fear in my voice unmistakable. "I'm here to help," he said, his tone calm but serious. "You've stumbled onto something dangerous, something you shouldn't have seen, and now it's after you." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Grayson sighed, setting his drink down on the bar. "We don't know exactly, but we do know it's not human. It wears human skin, pretends to be one of us, but it's not. And it's been doing this for a long time." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Jeremy," I whispered, the realization dawning on me. Mr. Grayson nodded. "Jeremy and others like him. They're all over the place, hiding in plain sight. Most people don't notice, don't realize what's happening. But you did, and now they know you know. What do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Mr. Grayson leaned in closer, his expression serious. You need to be careful. Don't trust anyone. Don't let your guard down. They're going to try to get to you, to make you doubt yourself, to make you think you're crazy. But you're not. You're seeing the truth, and they don't want that. I swallowed hard, trying to process everything he was telling me. How do I stop them? I asked, my voice trembling. Mr. Grayson shook his head. You can't. All you can do is stay one step ahead, keep moving, don't let them catch you. My mind was spinning with fear and confusion. What do they want? Why are they doing this? Mr. Grayson hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Some say they're trying to replace us, to take over. Others think they're just trying to survive, that they need human skins to keep going. But the truth is, no one really knows. All we know is that they're dangerous, and they'll stop at nothing to protect their secret. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the reality of my situation sank in. I was being hunted by something inhuman, something that could wear human skin and move through the world unnoticed, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Why are you helping me? I asked, my voice shaky. Mr. Grayson looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because I've been where you are. I've seen what they can do, what they're capable of, and I don't want to see anyone else go through that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, sliding it across the bar to me. If you ever need help, call me. But be careful, don't trust anyone, not even me, unless you're sure. I took the card, my hands trembling. Thank you, I whispered, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the overwhelming fear. Mr. Grayson nodded and got up to leave. Good luck, kid. You're going to need it. As he walked out of the bar, I sat there, staring at the card in my hand. The reality of my situation was sinking in, the fear settling deep in my bones. I was being hunted by something I didn't understand, something that could be anyone, anywhere. And I was completely alone. The days that followed my encounter with Mr. Grayson were some of the most harrowing of my life. I knew now that I was being hunted, but what I didn't know was who or what was behind it. The idea that anyone around me could be one of these creatures left me constantly on edge, questioning everyone I encountered, doubting everything I saw. Sarah tried to help, but I could tell she was getting frustrated with me. My paranoia was affecting our relationship, and despite her patience, there were moments when I could see the strain in her eyes. I was dragging her into a nightmare she couldn't possibly understand, and part of me wanted to push her away, to keep her safe from the horrors I was facing. But I also knew I needed someone to anchor me to reality, to remind me that I wasn't completely alone. Despite Mr. Grayson's warning, I found myself increasingly isolated, trapped in a spiral of fear and distrust. Every time I left the apartment, I felt eyes on me, as though I were being followed. I began to avoid public places, only going out when absolutely necessary, and even then, I took the longest routes, always checking behind me, doubling back to make sure I wasn't being trailed. One evening, as I sat alone in Sarah's apartment, I found myself obsessively scrolling through online forums dedicated to paranormal phenomena. I had avoided these kinds of sites for most of my life, dismissing them as the domain of conspiracy theorists and crackpots. But now I needed answers, no matter how far-fetched they might be. I stumbled upon a thread about skinwalkers, a term I had only heard in passing. The stories were eerily similar to what I had experienced: strange figures that moved unnaturally, creatures that could mimic human appearance but never quite got it right. The posts described them as ancient beings, part of Native American folklore, but also something that had adapted to modern times, hiding in plain sight, preying on the unsuspecting. As I read through the accounts, my heart began to race. The descriptions matched Jeremy almost perfectly: the way he moved, the unsettling sense that something was off, the feeling that he wasn't entirely human. The more I read, the more convinced I became that I was dealing with something far older and far more dangerous than I had initially realized. But the thread didn't offer much in the way of solutions. Most of the posts were just stories, horrifying, yes, but ultimately just recountings of other people's experiences. There were no concrete answers, no clear advice on how to protect oneself from these creatures. The most common suggestion was to stay out of the woods, to avoid isolated areas, to not engage with them. But that was easier said than done when one of them was working at the corner store across the street. Frustrated, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. The paranoia was starting to wear me down, draining my energy and my willpower. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give. But what could I do? Mr. Grayson's advice had been vague at best, and the online forums offered little more than warnings to avoid the creatures. I was stuck, trapped in a situation I couldn't escape from, with no clear path forward. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Sarah. "Hey, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a pang of guilt. I hadn't told Sarah about Mr. Grayson or what he had said. I had kept her in the dark, trying to protect her, but I knew I was only making things worse by shutting her out. Taking a deep breath, I typed out a response: "I'm fine. Just need some time to clear my head. I'll be home soon." After sending the message, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. I needed to get out of the apartment, to get some fresh air and try to clear my mind. The walls were closing in on me, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own fear. The night air was cool and refreshing as I stepped outside. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, with only the occasional car passing by. I started walking, letting my feet carry me without any particular destination in mind. I just needed to move, to escape the thoughts that were gnawing at my sanity. As I walked, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that maybe Mr. Grayson had been wrong, that maybe I was just dealing with a socially awkward guy who happened to work the night shift. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, profoundly wrong. The fear that had taken root in my mind wouldn't let go, and I knew that until I found answers, I would never be free of it. After wandering for a while, I found myself standing outside the bar where I had met Mr. Grayson. The sign was dimly lit, casting a faint glow on the sidewalk. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The bar was just as I remembered it: dark, quiet, with a few patrons scattered around, nursing their drinks in the shadows. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a drink, hoping the alcohol would calm my nerves. As I sipped my drink, I couldn't help but glance around the room, half expecting to see Mr. Grayson sitting in one of the booths. But he wasn't there. The place felt empty, devoid of the tension and danger I had felt during our first meeting. I almost wished he would appear, if only to offer some reassurance, some guidance on what I should do next. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that he wasn't coming. I was on my own. I finished my drink and was about to leave when I noticed something odd. There was a man sitting at the far end of the bar, his back turned to me. He was wearing a dark jacket, and his hair was short and unkempt. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Curiosity getting the better of me, I walked over to him. As I got closer, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like I had seen this man before, but couldn't remember where. "Hey," I said, my voice tentative. "Do I know you?" The man turned slowly, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the same man I had seen at the baseball game, the one who looked like Jeremy. Only this time, I could see his face clearly. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were dark and sunken. There was something deeply unsettling about his appearance, something that made my skin crawl. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile, it was a twisted, mocking grin that sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white. "You know who I am," he said, his tone dripping with malice. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. This wasn't Jeremy, but it was something like him, something that had taken on his appearance, his mannerisms, but with a twisted, nightmarish edge. "You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Get away from me." The man chuckled, a low, sinister sound that made my blood run cold. "You think you can just walk away? You think you can escape?" I took another step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. "You can't escape us," the man continued, his voice soft and menacing. "We're everywhere. We see everything. And we know everything about you." The fear that had been building inside me exploded into full-blown panic. I turned and bolted for the door, not caring who saw me, not caring if I looked crazy. I just needed to get out, to get away from that man and the terrifying truth he had just revealed. I ran down the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached Sarah's apartment, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. When I finally got inside, I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, replaying the encounter over and over, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in grave danger. The man's words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that I was being watched, that I was being hunted, and that there was no escape. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's twisted smile, heard his mocking voice, felt the cold dread that had settled deep in my bones. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with fear and uncertainty. The next morning, Sarah noticed the bags under my eyes, the pallor of my skin, the tremor in my hands. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the concern in her eyes, the worry that was eating away at her. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "You need to talk to someone," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "This is getting out of hand. You're scaring me." I didn't know how to respond. She was right. I was losing control, descending into a spiral of fear and paranoia that I couldn't escape from. But I couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't explain what I had seen, what I was going through. She would never believe me. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "I just need some time to clear my head." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded, letting the matter drop. "Okay," she said quietly, "but please, if you need help, just let me know." I nodded, though I knew I wouldn't. I was on my own in this, whatever this was. Over the next few days, I tried to keep a low profile, staying inside as much as possible, avoiding contact with anyone. I knew now that the creatures, whatever they were everywhere, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had to be careful, had to stay one step ahead, just as Mr. Grayson had warned. But it was easier said than done. The fear was eating away at me, wearing me down, making it harder and harder to think clearly. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every little noise, seeing shadows where there were none. And then one night, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep as usual. The apartment was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I had been lying there for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of Jeremy, Mr. Grayson, and the man at the bar. Suddenly I heard a noise of faint tapping, like something was tapping on the window. My heart skipped a beat as I sat up, listening intently. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, sending a shiver down my spine. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, my hands trembling. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of something or someone standing outside. Taking a deep breath, I pulled back the curtain and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing on the fire escape, was Jeremy. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, his breath fogging up the window. His expression was blank, almost mechanical, but there was something in his eyes, something dark and malevolent, something that sent a wave of terror crashing over me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us moving. The fear that had been building inside me reached a crescendo, and I felt like I was going to pass out. Then, slowly, Jeremy raised his hand and placed it against the glass. His fingers were long and thin, almost skeletal, and as they touched the window, the glass began to crack. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. I had to get out of there, I had to escape. I turned and bolted for the door, not caring if I woke Sarah, not caring if I made noise. I just needed to get out, to get away from Jeremy and the nightmare that was unfolding before my eyes. As I ran down the hallway, I heard the sound of glass shattering, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps on the floor. Jeremy was inside, he was coming for me. I reached the front door and fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of escape, of survival. I had to get out, I had to get away. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and threw it open, sprinting down the hallway and out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, my lungs burning, my legs aching, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally stopped, I doubled over, gasping for breath, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. I had no idea where I was or what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't go back. Jeremy had found me, and now he was hunting me. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The street was empty, the buildings dark and silent. I had no idea where to go, no idea who to turn to. Then I remembered the card Mr. Grayson had given me, the one he had said to use if I ever needed help. My hands trembling, I pulled it out of my pocket and stared at it. The words were simple, "Call me." Below them was a phone number. Without hesitation, I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for him to pick up. After a few rings, I heard his voice on the other end of the line. "Hello." "Mr. Grayson," I gasped, my voice trembling. "It's me. I need your help." There was a brief pause, then his voice came back, calm and steady. "Where are you?" "I don't know," I admitted, looking around frantically. "I'm on some street. He's after me. Jeremy, he found me. He broke into the apartment. I had to run." "Stay where you are," Mr. Grayson said firmly. "I'm coming to get you." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and sank to the ground, my back against the wall, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. I had no idea what was going to happen next, no idea how I was going to survive this. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Mr. Grayson was coming, and maybe, just maybe, he could help me escape this nightmare. I sat there in the dark, my back pressed against the cold, hard wall, listening to the distant hum of the city around me. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, every distant footstep sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I couldn't stop shaking, my body trembling from the adrenaline and terror coursing through my veins. Time seemed to stretch on forever as I waited for Mr. Grayson. The street was deserted, the buildings around me dark and silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see Jeremy or whatever he was emerging from the shadows, his twisted smile mocking me as he closed in for the kill. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a pair of headlights approaching from the end of the street. The car slowed as it neared, and I felt a surge of relief when I recognized Mr. Grayson behind the wheel. He pulled up beside me and leaned over to open the passenger door. "Get in," he said, his voice calm but urgent. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet and practically dove into the car, slamming the door behind me. Mr. Grayson wasted no time in pulling away, the tires screeching as he sped down the street. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I was too shaken to form coherent thoughts, let alone words, and Mr. Grayson seemed focused on getting us as far away from the area as possible. The car sped through the darkened streets, the buildings and streetlights blurring together as we raced away from the nightmare I had just escaped. Finally, when we were several miles away, Mr. Grayson slowed down and glanced over at me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. I think so," I stammered, my voice shaky. "Thank you for coming. I didn't know what else to do." Mr. Grayson nodded, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "You did the right thing. These things, whatever they are, they're dangerous. And they're persistent. Once they've marked you, they don't stop." A cold shiver ran down my spine at his words. "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do they do this? How do they mimic people?" Mr. Grayson sighed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "No one knows for sure. There are theories, of course, but nothing concrete. Some say they're ancient beings, creatures that have been around for centuries, maybe even millennia. Others think they're something else entirely, something beyond our understanding. But what we do know is that they're not human. They can mimic us, wear our faces, but they're not like us." He paused for a moment, his expression grim. "And they're getting better at it. Every year they blend in more, learn more about us. It's like they're evolving, adapting to survive in our world." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The idea that these creatures were out there, hiding among us, learning from us, was almost too much to bear. "But why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why are they after me?" Mr. Grayson glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Because you saw them. You saw through their disguise, and that makes you a threat. They can't afford to have people like you out there, people who can expose them. So they do whatever it takes to eliminate that threat. A sense of hopelessness settled over me. So what do I do? How do I stop them? Mr. Grayson shook his head. You can't stop them, not completely. But you can stay one step ahead. Keep moving, stay off the grid. Don't let them find you. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the best we've got. I leaned back in the seat, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The reality of my situation was sinking in, and I realized that my life as I knew it was over. I couldn't go back to my apartment, couldn't see Sarah again, not without putting her in danger. I was on the run now, hunted by creatures that could be anyone, anywhere. As we drove in silence, I found myself thinking about Sarah. I had left her behind in that apartment without a word of explanation, and now I might never see her again. The thought filled me with a deep, aching sadness. She deserved better than this, better than to be dragged into a nightmare that she couldn't possibly understand. But I knew that staying away was the only way to keep her safe. If these creatures were really after me, then the last thing I wanted was to lead them to her. Mr. Grayson must have sensed my thoughts because he spoke up, his voice gentle. I know this is hard. Leaving people behind, cutting ties, it's not easy, but it's necessary. The more people you're connected to, the more vulnerable you are. They can use them against you, just like they used your fear against you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I know, it's just hard. He glanced at me, his expression softening. It doesn't have to be forever. Just until you're safe, until we can figure out how to deal with this. I didn't respond, the weight of my situation pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. The idea of being on the run, constantly looking over my shoulder, was terrifying, but I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to survive, I had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of whatever was hunting me. After a while, Mr. Grayson pulled the car into a secluded parking lot, hidden away behind an abandoned building. He turned off the engine and looked at me, his expression serious. "This is where we part ways," he said, his voice firm. "I'm going to give you some cash, enough to get you to the next town. From there, you need to keep moving. Don't stay in one place for too long, and don't trust anyone. If you need help, use the contacts in the card I gave you. But remember, you're on your own now." I nodded, my heart heavy with fear and uncertainty. "Thank you," I said quietly, not knowing what else to say. Mr. Grayson handed me a small envelope filled with cash and a burner phone. "This phone is clean, no GPS, no tracking. Use it only if you need to. And whatever you do, don't let them catch you." I took the envelope and phone, my hands trembling. "I won't," I promised, though I wasn't sure how I was going to keep that promise. Mr. Grayson nodded and opened the car door. "Good luck," he said, his voice sincere. "I hope you find a way to stay safe." With that, he stepped out of the car and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I watched him go, a sense of finality settling over me. I was truly alone now, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the few items Mr. Grayson had given me. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to gather my thoughts. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, sadness, anger, but I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on them. I had to keep moving, had to stay focused if I wanted to survive. Finally, I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The night was dark and quiet, the air cool against my skin. I glanced around, taking in my surroundings, and then started walking, my footsteps echoing softly in the empty street. As I walked, my thoughts turned to Sarah again. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about how I had left her behind, about how she must be feeling right now. Part of me wanted to go back, to explain everything to her, to tell her that I was okay. But I knew that wasn't an option. I had to let her go, for both our sakes. The walk to the nearest bus station was long and lonely. The city seemed even more foreboding now, every shadow a potential threat, every passerby a possible enemy. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact, trying to blend into the background as much as possible. When I finally reached the bus station, I bought a ticket to the farthest destination I could afford. The attendant barely glanced at me as I handed over the cash, and I was grateful for the lack of attention. The less anyone noticed me, the better. I boarded the bus and took a seat near the back, pulling my hood up to shield my face. As the bus pulled out of the station, I stared out the window, watching the city fade into the distance. My life, my home, my friends, they were all behind me now, part of a world I could never return to. The journey was long and uneventful, the hours dragging by as the bus made its way through the night. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jeremy's face, heard his voice, felt the terror of that night all over again. When the bus finally reached its destination, I stepped off into a small, unfamiliar town. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the quiet streets. I had no idea where I was or what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay here for long. I found a cheap motel and paid for a room in cash, making sure to avoid the security cameras. The room was small and dingy, but it was a place to rest, a place to regroup and figure out my next move. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I pulled out the burner phone and stared at it. The urge to call Sarah was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't. Contacting her would only put her in danger, and I couldn't live with myself if something happened to her because of me. Instead, I called the number on Mr. Grayson's card. After a few rings, a voice answered, low and cautious. "Who is this?" "It's me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Grayson gave me this number. He said you could help." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice spoke again, this time with a note of recognition. "I see. Where are you?" I hesitated, unsure if I could trust this person. But I had no other options. I'm in a small town, about 100 miles from the city. I just got off the bus. "Good," the voice replied. "Stay there for now. Don't move. We'll send someone to get you." My heart raced. "Who are you? What is this?" "We're like Mr. Grayson," the voice said cryptically. "We know what you're dealing with and we can help. But you have to trust us." I didn't know what to say. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. But what choice did I have? I was alone, hunted, and completely out of my depth. "Okay," I agreed, my voice shaky. "I'll stay put." "Good," the voice repeated. "Someone will be there within the hour. Stay safe." The line went dead, and I lowered the phone, my mind spinning. Who were these people? Could they really help me? Or was this just another trap, another step in a nightmare that seemed to have no end? I didn't have long to think about it. Less than an hour later, there was a knock at the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. When I opened the door, I was met by a man and a woman, both dressed in plain clothes. They looked ordinary enough, but there was something about them, something in their eyes, in the way they carried themselves that set them apart. "Are you ready to go?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes. The woman stepped forward, handing me a small duffel bag. There's some food, clothes, and a few supplies in here. We'll explain everything once we're on the road. I took the bag, slinging it over my shoulder. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, the man replied, his expression serious. We'll explain more once we get there. But for now, you need to trust us. Trust. It was a word that had lost all meaning in the past few weeks, but I had no choice. These people, whoever they were my only hope. I followed them out of the motel and into a waiting car. As we drove away from the town, I couldn't help but glance out the window, watching the landscape pass by. I didn't know where I was going or what awaited me there, but I knew one thing for certain. My old life was over. The world I had known, the people I had loved, they were all behind me now, lost in the shadows of a nightmare I could never escape. But as the car sped down the highway, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had survived this far, and somehow I would keep surviving. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers I couldn't even begin to comprehend. But I was still here, still fighting, and as long as I kept moving, kept one step ahead of the darkness that pursued me, I knew I had a chance. A chance to find out the truth. A chance to survive. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to reclaim my life.